In today's video, we're going to discuss the different types of leases that you need to know for your real estate licensing exam. All right, so there's 8 different types of leases that you need to know for your exam. So let's take a look at each one of them. All right, so let's start out with the net lease. Now, the net lease is sometimes called a triple net lease because in a net lease, the tenant is going to pay a monthly or quarterly rent or however the rent schedule is set up. Plus, there are 3 other items that they're going to pay in addition to the rent. And that is going to be, they'll be responsible for maintenance, property taxes, and also the property insurance. So they're going to pay those 3 items in addition to utilities as well. Net lease is sometimes called a triple net lease. And again, you need to know that those are used interchangeably for the real estate licensing exam. The next one I want to talk about is a gross lease. Now, a gross lease is typically used in residential settings. All right, that's the first thing. Apartments and single-family homes and those type of things. And typically with the gross lease, it's just one rent payment at the beginning of the month, and that's it. It's just monthly rent, and then the owner is responsible for paying things like taxes and insurance. Now, under a gross lease, the tenant may or may not have to pay utilities. That's going to depend on the specific unit that's actually being rented out. So we see these in residentially zoned type properties. And by the way, I forgot to mention, net leases we typically see in commercial type settings. The next lease I want to talk about is a percentage lease. Now, percentage lease is what's typically used in retail establishments, such as malls and things like that. And the tenant is going to typically pay a monthly rent plus a certain percentage of gross sales. And it's important to know that it's gross and not net. That's a key point you're going to have to know in particular for broker's exams. I have had students say that we're taking their broker's exam, make reference to that. So it's a certain percentage of gross sales, and typically with the percentage lease, we see that in retail outlets. All right, the next lease I'm going to talk about is what's called a sandwich lease. Now, we see sandwich leases when there is a subtenant. Now, I did a video where I discussed assignment of leases and subleasing, or sometimes called subletting. If there's a subletting situation, this is when we're going to see the sandwich lease come into play here. And if you want more information on that particular topic, right up here in your upper right-hand corner of your screen is a little I. Click on that and I'll provide a link to that particular video. But here's what a sandwich lease looks like. So we have the original lessor. Now remember, the lessor is the landlord, okay? Then the landlord rents it to the lessee, which is the tenant. Now what happens is the tenant then turns around and leases the property to the subtenant or the sub-lessee. And so what happens is this creates a sandwich where the lessee, the tenant, is sandwiched in the middle. All right, so that's when we would see a sandwich lease. The next lease I want to talk about is a graduated lease. Now, with a graduated lease, you may see this in office communities or office parks or office space. You could see it in certain types of commercial space as well. But it's a rent, a flat rent fee, and then is throughout. Let's say it's a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease. What's going to happen is periodically throughout that lease, there's going to be rent increases on stated time periods. All right, so we might have a situation where rent is $1,000 a month, then on the 1-year anniversary it goes up to $1,250. On the second anniversary it goes up to $1,500. It's expressed in the lease contract itself, and it's a definite amount of rent. It's not tied to any kind of index or anything like that. It is just a stated amount of rent increase in a stated period of time, which is a little bit different than an index lease. An index lease is something that where the tenant is going to pay rent, plus there will be rent increases over the life of the of the lease agreement, but it's attached to some kind of index, such as the Consumer Price Index. CPI, for example, is one that is used quite often. And so just like the graduated lease, maybe it's on the 1-year anniversaries, the rents go up, but unlike the graduated lease where it is a stated specific amount of money that the increase is going to be, the increase is based on that index. So if the CPI goes up 1%, then that's going to be what the rent increase is going to be on that annual anniversary. All right, so it's a little bit different. And then the last two, ground leases. Ground leases we typically see in recreational or campsites. So if you have a camper and you want to rent out a pad at a campsite, that's what we'd see a ground lease. All right, and then the last one is what we call a sale-leaseback. Sale-leasebacks aren't that common, but there's still something you need to know for your real estate licensing exam. And this is where we have the buyer and the seller. All right, and the buyer purchased the property from the seller and it goes to closing. And then immediately upon closing, the seller, they lease back the property for a specific period of time. We don't really see it too much in the residential side other than like post-occupancies where it's just a couple of days. This is more common in the commercial side of things where it's more long-term. And it's a mechanism, I won't go into details in this video, but it is a mechanism where a seller can sell the property, raise funds, because they need the money for maybe a different product line, for example, and then they turn around and lease that property back. And the idea is, based on the product line that they're opening up, there's a chance that they're going to outgrow the current space anyways. And so it kind of gets them out from underneath the property. It allows them cash or cash flow so they can start a new product line with the anticipation that at some point they're going to move the operations to a bigger place in the future. So that's a sale-leaseback. Okay, those are the 8 types of leases that you're going to need to know for your real estate licensing exam.